Welcome to today's Triple Z. The Triple Z podcast is a daily program that you can use to help you fall asleep each night. Just turn down the volume, lay back, relax, and enjoy as you fall asleep. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a classic science fiction novel written by the French author Jules Verne. It was first published in 1870 and is one of Verne's most famous works. The novel is known for its imaginative portrayal of underwater exploration and adventure. The story is narrated by Professor Pierre Aronnax, a French marine biologist who, along with his faithful servant Conseil and a Canadian harpooner named Ned Land, embarks on a journey to investigate mysterious sea creatures that have been causing havoc in the world's oceans. They soon discover that these creatures are actually part of a technologically advanced submarine, the Nautilus, commanded by the enigmatic Captain Nemo. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is considered a pioneering work of science fiction and is known for its accurate and detailed descriptions of underwater life and technology. It has been adapted into numerous films, television series, and other media and continues to be a beloved classic of literature. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to write us a review on your podcast platform and share us with a friend. You both might sleep just a little better at night. Our website is Triple Z, that's 3zs.media. You can also like and share our content on Facebook or our Instagram account ZZZ Media Podcast. Music for today's episode was provided by Gaia's Symphony on Apple Music. Chapter VIAT Full Steam. At this cry, the whole ship's crew hurried towards the harpooner. Commander, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys, even the engineers left their engines and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop her had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he had managed to see and what he had been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break. But Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' length from the Abraham Lincoln, on the starboard quarter, the sea seemed to be illuminated all over. It was not a mere phosphoric phenomenon. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water, and then threw out that very intense but inexplicable light mentioned in the report of several captains. This magnificent irradiation must have been produced by an agent of great shining power. The luminous part traced on the sea an immense oval, much elongated, the center of which condensed a burning heat whose overpowering brilliancy died out by successive gradations. "It is only an agglomeration of phosphoric particles," cried one of the officers. "No, sir, certainly not," I replied. Never did Pallades or Salpe produce such a powerful light. That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see. It moves. It is moving forwards, backwards. It is darting towards us. A general cry rose from the frigate. "Silence," said the captain. "Up with the helm. Reverse the engines." The steam was shut off, and the Abraham Lincoln, beating to port, described a semicircle. "Right the helm. Go ahead," cried the captain. These orders were executed, and the frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double her own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction more than fear made us dumb and motionless. The animal gained on us, sporting with the waves. It made the round of the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped it with its electric rings like luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, leaving a phosphorescent track like those volumes of steam that the express trains leave behind. All at once, from the dark line of the horizon whither it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly towards the Abraham Lincoln with alarming rapidity, stopped suddenly about 20 feet from the hull, and died out, not diving under the water, for its brilliancy did not abate, but suddenly, and as if the source of this brilliant emanation was exhausted. Then it reappeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the maneuvers of the frigate. She fled and did not attack. On the captain's face, generally so impassive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. "Mr. Aronnax," he said, "I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how attack this unknown thing, how defend oneself from it? Wait for daylight, and the scene will change. You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal?" "No, sir, it is evidently a gigantic narwhal, and an electric one. Perhaps," added I, "one can only approach it with a gymnotus or a torpedo." "Undoubtedly," replied the captain, "if it possesses such dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that ever was created. That is why, sir, I must be on my guard." The crew were on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rock it at will, and seemed decided not to leave the scene of the struggle. Towards midnight, however, it disappeared, or, to use a more appropriate term, it died out like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear, not hope. But at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning a deafening whistling was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. The captain, Ned Land, and I were then on the poop, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. "Ned Land," asked the commander, "you have often heard the roaring of whales?" "Often, sir, but never such whales the sight of which brought me in $2,000. If I can only approach within 4 harpoon lengths of it." "But to approach it," said the commander, "I ought to put a whaler at your disposal?" "Certainly, sir." "That will be trifling with the lives of my men." "And mine too," simply said the harpooner. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distance and the noise of the wind and sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail, and even its panting breath. It seemed that, at the moment that the enormous narwhal had come to take breath at the surface of the water, the air was engulfed in its lungs, like the steam in the vast cylinders of a machine of 2,000 horsepower. Thought I, a whale with the strength of a cavalry regiment would be a pretty whale. We were on the qui vive till daylight, and prepared for the combat. The fishing implements were laid along the hammock nettings. The second lieutenant loaded the blunderbusses, which could throw harpoons to the distance of a mile, and long duck guns, with explosive bullets, which inflicted mortal wounds even to the most terrible animals. Ned Land contented himself with sharpening his harpoon, a terrible weapon, in his hands. At 6 o'clock day began to break, and, with the first glimmer of light, the electric light of the narwhal disappeared. At 7 o'clock the day was sufficiently advanced, but a very thick sea fog obscured our view, and the best spyglasses could not pierce it. That caused disappointment and anger. I climbed the mizzenmast. Some officers were already perched on the mastheads. At 8 o'clock the fog lay heavily on the waves, and its thick scrolls rose little by little. The horizon grew wider and clearer at the same time. Suddenly, just as on the day before, Ned Land's voice was heard. "The thing itself on the port quarter," cried the harpooner. Every eye was turned towards the point indicated. There, 1.5 miles from the frigate, a long blackish body emerged a yard above the waves. Its tail, violently agitated, produced a considerable eddy. Never did a caudal appendage beat the sea with such violence. An immense track of dazzling whiteness marked the passage of the animal and described a long curve. The frigate approached the cetacean. I examined it thoroughly. The reports of the Shannon and of the Helvetia have rather exaggerated its size, and I estimated its length at only 250 feet. As to its dimensions, I could only conjecture them to be admirably proportioned. While I watched this phenomenon, 2 jets of steam and water were ejected from its vents and rose to the height of 120 feet, thus I ascertained its way of breathing. I concluded definitely that it belonged to the vertebrate branch, class Mammalia. The crew waited impatiently for their chief's orders. The latter, after having observed the animal attentively, called the engineer. The engineer ran to him. "Sir," said the commander, "you have steam up?" "Yes, sir," answered the engineer. "Well, make up your fires and put on all steam." 3 hurrahs greeted this order. The time for the struggle had arrived. Some moments after, the 2 funnels of the frigate vomited torrents of black smoke, and the bridge quaked under the trembling of the boilers. The Abraham Lincoln, propelled by her wonderful screw, went straight at the animal. The latter allowed it to come within half a cable's length, then, as if disdaining to dive, it took a little turn and stopped a short distance off. This pursuit lasted nearly 3/4 of an hour, without the frigate gaining 2 yards on the cetacean. It was quite evident that at that rate we should never come up with it. "Well, Mr. Land," asked the captain, "do you advise me to put the boats out to sea?" "No, sir," replied Ned Land, "because we shall not take that beast easily." "What shall we do then?" "Put on more steam if you can, sir." "With your leave, I mean to post myself under the bowsprit, and if we get within harpooning distance, I shall throw my harpoon." "Go, Ned," said the captain. "Engineer, put on more pressure." Ned Land went to his post. The fires were increased, the screw revolved 43 times a minute, and the steam poured out of the valves. We heaved the log and calculated that the Abraham Lincoln was going at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. But the accursed animal swam too at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. For a whole hour, the frigate kept up this pace, without gaining 6 feet. It was humiliating for one of the swiftest sailors in the American Navy. A stubborn anger seized the crew. The sailors abused the monster, who, as before, disdained to answer them. The captain no longer contented himself with twisting his beard, he nodded. The engineer was again called. "You have turned full steam in?" "Yes, sir," replied the engineer. The speed of the Abraham Lincoln increased. Its masts trembled down to their stepping holes, and the clouds of smoke could hardly find way out of the narrow funnels. They heaved the log a second time. "Well," asked the captain of the man at the wheel. 19 miles and 3/10, sir." "Clap on more steam." The engineer obeyed. The manometer showed 10 degrees. But the cetacean grew warm itself, No doubt, for without straining itself, it made 193/10 miles. What a pursuit! No, I cannot describe the emotion that vibrated through me. Ned Land kept his post, harpoon in hand. Several times the animal let us gain upon it. "We shall catch it! We shall catch it!" cried the Canadian. But just as he was going to strike, the cetacean stole away with a rapidity that could not be estimated at less than 30 miles an hour, and even during our maximum of speed, it bullied the frigate, going round and round it. A cry of fury broke from everyone. At noon we were no further advanced than at 8 o'clock in the morning. The captain then decided to take more direct means. "Ah," said he, "that animal goes quicker than the Abraham Lincoln. Very well. We will see whether it will escape these conical bullets. Send your men to the forecastle, sir." The forecastle gun was immediately loaded and slewed round. But the shot passed some feet above the cetacean, which was half a mile off. "Another, more to the right," cried the commander, "and $5 to whoever will hit that infernal beast." An old gunner with a gray beard that I can see now with steady eye and grave face went up to the gun and took a long aim. A loud report was heard, with which were mingled the cheers of the crew. An old gray-bearded gunner. The bullet did its work. It hit the animal, but not fatally, and sliding off the rounded surface, was lost in 2 miles depth of sea. The chase began again, and the captain, leaning towards me, said, "I will pursue that beast till my frigate bursts up." "Yes," answered I, "and you will be quite right to do it." I wish the beast would exhaust itself, and not be insensible to fatigue like a steam engine. But it was of no use. Hours passed, without its showing any signs of exhaustion. However, it must be said in praise of the Abraham Lincoln that she struggled on indefatigably. I cannot reckon the distance she made under 300 miles during this unlucky day, November the 6th. But night came on and overshadowed the rough ocean. Now I thought our expedition was at an end, and that we should never again see the extraordinary animal. I was mistaken. At 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, the electric light reappeared 3 miles to windward of the frigate, as pure, as intense as during the preceding night. The narwhal seemed motionless. Perhaps, tired with its day's work, it slept, letting itself float with the undulation of the waves. Now was a chance of which the captain resolved to take advantage. He gave his orders. The Abraham Lincoln kept up half steam and advanced cautiously so as not to wake its adversary. It is no rare thing to meet in the middle of the ocean whales so sound asleep that they can be successfully attacked, and Ned Land had harpooned more than one during its sleep. The Canadian went to take his place again under the bowsprit. The frigate approached noiselessly, stopped at 2 cables' lengths from the animal, and following its track. No one breathed. A deep silence reigned on the bridge. We were not 100 feet from the burning focus, the light of which increased and dazzled our eyes. At this moment, leaning on the forecastle bulwark, I saw below me Ned Land grappling the martingale in one hand, brandishing his terrible harpoon in the other, scarcely 20 feet from the motionless animal. Suddenly his arm straightened, and the harpoon was thrown. I heard the sonorous stroke of the weapon, which seemed to have struck a hard body. The electric light went out suddenly, and 2 enormous waterspouts broke over the bridge of the frigate, rushing like a torrent from stem to stern, overthrowing men and breaking the lashings of the spars. A fearful shock followed, and, thrown over the rail without having time to stop myself, I fell into the sea. Chapter by an unknown species of whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I am a good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron or Edgar Poe, who were masters of the art, and in that plunge I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me to the surface of the water. My first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round? Would the captain put out a boat? Might I hope to be saved? The darkness was intense. I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing in the east, its beacon lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate. I was lost. Help! Help! I shouted, swimming towards the Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me. They seemed glued to my body and paralyzed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. Help! This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water, I struggled against being drawn down the abyss. Suddenly my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn up to the surface of the sea, and I heard, yes, I heard these words pronounced in my ear. If Master would be so good as to lean on my shoulder, Master would swim with much greater ease. I seized with one hand my faithful Consal's arm. Is it you? Said I. You? Myself, answered Consal, and waiting Master's orders. That shot threw you as well as me into the sea? No, but being in my Master's service, I followed him. The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. And the frigate? I asked. The frigate, replied Consal, turning on his back. I think that Master had better not count too much on her. You think so? I say that, at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard the men at the wheel say, the screw and the rudder are broken. Broken? Yes, broken by the monster's teeth. It is the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained. But it is a bad lookout for us. She no longer answers her helm. Then we are lost. Perhaps so, calmly answered Consal. However, we have still several hours before us, and one can do a good deal in some hours. Consal's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but, cramped by my clothes, which stuck to me like a leaden weight, I felt great difficulty in bearing up. Consal saw this. Will Master let me make a slit? Said he, and, slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them up from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off me, while I swam for both of us. Then I did the same for Consal, and we continued to swim near to each other. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and if it had been, the frigate could not tack, being without its helm. Consal argued on this supposition, and laid his plans accordingly. This phlegmatic boy was perfectly self-possessed. We then decided that, as our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats, we ought to manage so as to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength so that both should not be exhausted at the same time, and this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back, quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched out, the other would swim and push the other on in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim on for some hours, perhaps till daybreak. Poor chance! But hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were 2 of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred about 11 o'clock the evening before. I reckon then we should have 8 hours to swim before sunrise, an operation quite practicable if we relieved each other. The sea, very calm, was in our favor. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silvery rings. One might have said that we were in a bath of quicksilver. Near 1 o'clock in the morning, I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My limbs stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Conseil was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant. His breathing became short and hurried. I found that he could not keep up much longer. "Leave me! Leave me!" I said to him. "Leave my master?" "Never," replied he. "I would drown first." Just then the moon appeared through the fringes of a thick cloud that the wind was driving to the east. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us. My head got better again. I looked at all points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us and looked like a dark mass, hardly discernible. But no boats! I would have cried out. But what good would it have been at such a distance? My swollen lips could utter no sounds. Conseil could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help! Help!" Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might be only a singing in the ear, but it seemed to me as if a cry answered the cry from Conseil. "Did you hear?" I murmured. "Yes. Yes." And Conseil gave one more despairing call. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature, abandoned in the middle of the ocean, some other victim of the shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather, was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Conseil made a last effort, and, leaning on my shoulder, while I struck out in a despairing effort, he raised himself half out of the water, then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" "I saw," murmured he. "I saw, but do not talk, reserve all your strength." What had he seen? Then, I know not why, the thought of the monster came into my head for the first time. But that voice. The time is past for Jonas to take refuge in whales' bellies. However, Conseil was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that came nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted, my fingers stiffened, my hand afforded me support no longer, my mouth, convulsively opening, filled with salt water. Cold crept over me. I raised my head for the last time, then I sank. At this moment a hard body struck me. I clung to it, then I felt that I was being drawn up, that I was brought to the surface of the water, that my chest collapsed. I fainted. It is certain that I soon came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. "Conseil," I murmured. "Does master call me?" asked Conseil. Just then, by the waning light of the moon which was sinking down to the horizon, I saw a face which was not Conseil's, and which I immediately recognized. "Ned!" I cried. "The same, sir, who is seeking his prize," replied the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by the shock to the frigate?" "Yes, Professor, but more fortunate than you, I was able to find a footing almost directly upon a floating island." "An island? Or, more correctly speaking, our gigantic narwhal." "Explain yourself, Ned." "Only I soon found out why my harpoon had not entered its skin and was blunted." "Why, Ned, why?" "Because, Professor, that beast is made of sheet iron." The Canadian's last words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wriggled myself quickly to the top of the being, or object, half out of the water, which served us for a refuge. I kicked it. It was evidently a hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substance that forms the bodies of the great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony carapace, like that of the antediluvian animals, and I should be free to class this monster among amphibious reptiles, such as tortoises or alligators. Well, no! The blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scales. The blow produced a metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it was made of riveted plates. There was no doubt about it. This monster, this natural phenomenon that had puzzled the learned world, and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres, it must be owned, a still more astonishing phenomenon, inasmuch as it was a simply human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying upon the back of a sort of submarine boat, which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up on this point. Conseil and I could only agree with him. Just then a bubbling began at the back of this strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. We had only just time to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. "As long as it sails horizontally," muttered Ned Land, "I do not mind, but if it takes a fancy to dive, I would not give 2 straws for my life." The Canadian might have said still less. It became really necessary to communicate with the beings, whatever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside for an aperture, a panel, or a manhole, to use a technical expression, but the lines of the iron rivets, solidly driven into the joints of the iron plates, were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then, and left us in total darkness. At last this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance prevents my describing all the impressions it made. I can only recall one circumstance. During some lulls of the wind and sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony produced by words of command. What was then the mystery of this submarine craft, of which the whole world vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed in this strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mists surrounded us, but they soon cleared off. I was about to examine the hull, which formed on deck a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it gradually sinking. "Oh! Confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you inhospitable rascals!" Happily the sinking movement ceased. Suddenly a noise, like ironworks violently pushed aside, came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved, a man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments after, 8 strong men, with masked faces, appeared noiselessly, and drew us down into their formidable machine.